Hi, my name is Jen, and today I wanted to share a book review on the 5 love languages. So let's get started. Some of you may know that my educational background is in psychology and mental health, and I also just throughout my life have really loved self-help books. So as you can imagine, I have come across this book in a number of contexts before, and I really just wanted to kind of create a series on book reviews so that way I can highlight some good and bad resources available so that way you can get proper help. As you can possibly tell, this book is from the library, which will kind of give you a clue as to what I think about the book. We only own books that we really love and recommend, and so this one does not fit into that criteria. So I do not recommend this book. There are some benefits to it. A lot of people do like it, but I think that a lot of the benefits found in this book can be found in much better books. And I think that there are some negative things about this book that are really bad and really worth considering. Alright, so I will just go into some of the pros just really briefly. The book is very short. It's a very thin book. It's very easy to read, understand, and go through. So I really do appreciate that aspect of the book. I really like how in the beginning of the book he differentiates between kind of the in love phase and actually being in more of a committed choosing to love relationship, and how that can really take a lot of work. I think that's a really important distinction, and that's something that people need to kind of be aware of. I like how at the end of each of the chapters he has some exercises and kind of questionnaires, so you can kind of apply and really figure out if the chapter applies to you or not. And then finally, I also like that his kind of overall point is that we need to make sure that the way we're communicating is actually being received by the other person. So if we're communicating love or communicating in one way, we need to make sure that that communication is being received by the other person. And that can be something that is just really difficult. So I like that he really draws some attention to that issue. If you're not familiar with the 5 love languages, the 5 love languages that he identifies are words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, and physical touch. And that's the order that he goes through in the book. Alright, so since I don't recommend the book, that does mean that there are a couple of cons, and I think that these are pretty significant. The first is that this is not research-based. He is a counselor or therapist, so this is based on his experience in couples counseling or individual counseling. These are the things that he's come across. That is definitely something to consider as you're reading this book and thinking about applying it to your life. It is not something that has been studied. It is just something that he's found in his personal experience in his limited area and kind of demographics and other things. Also, as I was reading the book, I just noticed that he included some details that didn't really need to be included. This may be a little nitpicky, but he really likes to include lots of details about people just really liking this and thinking, great things about him. And it just seems like he's just very self-congratulatory. And there's nothing wrong with being proud of yourself and other things like that. But I've read some other self-help books by other authors who actually do research and who really have some other kind of what I think is more valuable insights to share. And one of them in particular, John Gottman, is widely held as one of the best marriage counselors because he really actively studies this. He's written a number of books, and I'll review a few of them. But I don't get that same tone and impression from him. Lots of other people sing his praises. He doesn't have to do that. And so that is kind of a smaller thing, but it is something that just kind of rubs me the wrong way. Another thing that I don't really like about the book is a little bit more on his theory. Gary Chapman believes that the love languages are lifelong. To assume that the love languages are lifelong without any research, without any study, without any evidence to back that up, I think that is very misleading, and it really kind of puts people into a box. The other thing that I really dislike, and this is also something that he really believes is the primary part of his whole theory and kind of view, and he actually answers this as a direct question later in the book, but he also believes that there are primary love languages and then kind of secondary love languages. And I really don't think of it that way. I think that people are far more complex than that, and people have different needs and they change. I would be much more comfortable if he approached the whole thing a little bit differently, more like this is a need that this person has at this time, and this is something that really needs to be addressed right now. There are times when acts of service are more important than others, and a lot of the examples he provides of people showing or exhibiting a certain love language, I think those are really just more time sensitive. There was a need, there was a traumatic situation, something was being neglected, and so that kind of love language really stood out as being the primary one. My belief is that we all have these needs, and they all need to be addressed and paid attention to. And when they're not being addressed and paid attention to, when there's neglect or kind of an opening there, that's when it really kind of becomes a little bit more prominent. And I think if you read this book, you would get the idea that that's your primary love language. And I don't know that that's necessarily the case. Again, there's no evidence to support this, just his personal experience. So it's very subjective. He kind of compares love to a tank and just kind of making sure that your love tank is full. But I would also just say that, kind of like using that example of like a car, you would not take a car to a mechanic one time, have them assess the needs, and then just every time after that assume that it's the same issue. There could be different issues that come up with your car, depending on the timing, the age of the car, lots of other things. And similarly, I think the same is true for relationships. Just because there's a need at one time, that doesn't mean that that's always the same case. It may mean that, it may mean it for a little while, but to assume that that's just always the issue or the problem, I think is a bit lazy and naive. I also think that kind of coming at relationships with a kind of primary love language and secondary love language, I think that lends itself to more of a minimalist approach. Like, I'll only put in as much work as I have to. So I'll find the love language and I'll just love this person in that way. And I think that is very misleading, and I would not recommend that to anybody as a successful method for pursuing a romantic and lifelong relationship with someone. If you're just trying to just do the bare minimum to get by, I suppose you can do that. I don't know that that's going to lead anywhere positive, and especially if you're reading a book like this, I think you're really trying to do something good and productive for your relationship. And so this really kind of leads you to believe that you only have to do so much. Again, as I've mentioned, I think that relationships just take a lot of work. You need to continually communicate, both through like actions and gifts and kind of indirect measures, but I think you really have to communicate directly. Another kind of con is in the 12th chapter called Loving the Unlovely, and then specifically on pages 154 through the end of the chapter. He goes into detail about a woman who comes in for counseling, and her husband's primary love language is physical touch. And he actually uses faith, religion, as a way to make this woman for 6 months have sex with her husband. And the husband is not getting any type of counseling. He's not coming in for counseling. The chapter is on loving the unlovely. So the whole idea or concept is that you need to love people even when they don't love you back. And while I agree with some aspects of that, to just jump all the way to the kind of ultimate or most intimate kind of form of expressing love for this particular love language, I feel like that's just not a very good practice. If somebody had a love language of gifts, I would not just recommend somebody to buy the most expensive gifts every day for 6 months. That's just not good advice. There are things that you can do to still communicate love in that love language, if you want to assume this kind of overall theory. But you wouldn't jump to the most intimate, deepest form immediately. And especially if there's a lot of other issues, and if she feels violated or if she has anything going on, I would definitely not recommend just having sex with your husband as a fix-all kind of situation. If his love language is physical touch, then there are other things that she can do. According to his theory, there's other ways that she can express love to him. I think that there are times when you do choose to show an expression of love when you may not feel that way, but I think those scenarios are kind of more few and far between, and those are things that you should assess regularly. You should not just for 6 months as a blanket statement try and do something. I think that's very dangerous. I think that can lead to a lot of harm, hurt feelings. That can lead to a lot of confusion. It doesn't address her needs at all, and her concerns, her feelings, her experiences, and it also doesn't help them communicate better as a couple. It's just her doing something that she doesn't want to do, otherwise she would have been doing it already, and him just getting what he wants with no explanation or understanding as to why. And I don't think that's good for a relationship. It made me feel very uncomfortable. Ethically speaking, I think that you really are supposed to be treating the person who's sitting in front of you. And since the husband did not come in for counseling, and as far as we know, would not come in and does not come in, I think it's really kind of wrong for him to be trying to diagnose him and trying to treat him. The woman came in, the wife came in, and she has needs, she has concerns, she has experiences. And so I think for him to give this type of advice and then to also use religion to kind of force this advice on her or guilt her into it, I think is very wrong and dangerous. I think that there are times when it is appropriate to stay in a relationship, even if it doesn't feel totally amazing. I think relationships do take work, and sometimes that work isn't always very enjoyable or other things like that. So I definitely understand staying in a relationship for a little bit, but I feel like this book and a lot of the way that he talked in his examples of counseling sessions and other things like that, it seems like he's really trying to put this theory out as a kind of permanent solution, one size fits all. And I think that can be very dangerous. I think it can lead people to stay in a bad relationship a lot longer than they should. So I think that some really important red flags are if you're trying to actually communicate and just talk directly with a person and they're not listening to you, or they're minimizing you, or gaslighting you, or whatever else. I think that's a very serious red flag. A lot of people also wait until like kind of the last straw or the very end before going to couples counseling. So I feel like if you request couples counseling and the person refuses, I think that's a really big warning sign or red flag as well. I think that relationships do take work and effort, as I've mentioned multiple times. And I think that that work and effort needs to be shared, and both people have to take responsibility for that. And so if one person is choosing not to, then I think that's something very serious to consider and think about. So those are some of my thoughts and kind of experiences with the book. Overall, I think at best, this is a tool to help you just begin to think about different needs. Maybe you've never thought about needs that somebody else may have. So this could be a tool to help you begin to think about that. I don't think it's a permanent solution in the way that he kind of thinks it is, and that a lot of other people seem to talk about it. I think that each person is unique, and every time an issue comes up, the situation and the details and even that person can be totally different. And so you really want to continue to communicate and assess. Overall, I would not recommend this book. I think that a lot of the prose in this book can be found in other much better books. So I'll actually be doing some book reviews on those books in the next coming weeks. One of them will be His Needs, Her Needs. I think I'll do that one next. And then I have a few books written by John Gottman. I mentioned him earlier. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Please stay tuned for those other book reviews coming up. If you have a book that you would like me to review, please leave it down in the comments below, and I'd love to read it and then review it for you. I hope you have a great day. Bye.